All right, hello and welcome. Welcome to the NSF X Labs webinar. We'll be introducing the NSF X Labs opportunity, which we previously introduced as the NSF Tech Labs initiative in an RFI last December. And we're also going to specifically discuss the quantum systems, interconnects, and integrated photonics X Lab topic that was announced as part of the first batch of NSF X Labs alongside the topic scientific instrumentation for scientific instrumentation for sensing and imaging. My name is Becca Shamil. I'm an associate program director with NSF within the TIP Directorate, or Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. And I'd like to thank you for being interested in this exciting new initiative at NSF TIP. Here's going to be today's webinar agenda. We'll start with the opening remarks from the NSF Assistant Director for TIP, then go into an overview for the NSF X Labs opportunity, then highlight the quantum systems, interconnects, and integrated photonics topic, and then end with a live Q&A panel. The webinar will run approximately 75 minutes to address as many questions as possible. The Q&A will be closed for most of the presentation. When the Q&A feature opens, you'll be able to click the Q&A button to type and submit questions for response towards the end of the webinar and during the live Q&A. Next, please welcome Erwin Gianchandani, the NSF Assistant Director for TIP, who has championed the NSF X Labs initiative as a pioneering new funding mechanism to support high-risk emerging technologies and advance U.S. science and technology research. We'll turn to him first to help us set the stage for this new initiative. Erwin?
Great. Thanks very much, Becca. And thanks to all of you for taking the time out from, I'm sure, very busy schedules to join us for this webinar today. As Becca said, my name is Erwin Gianchandani, and I have the pleasure and the honor of serving as the Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. So I help to lead the TIP Directorate here at NSF that we stood up just a little over 4 years ago now. So I wanted to provide a little bit of context setting in terms of why the X Labs initiative and why now. And I thought I would best do that by providing a little bit of a context or reminder about the NSF as a whole, the U.S. National Science Foundation, and then also the positioning of the TIP Directorate within NSF as well. So let me first start by, I think many of you on this webinar today are well versed in NSF, but some of you may be new to this agency as well, may be attracted in by virtue of this new X Labs funding opportunity that we have put out. So just as context, the National Science Foundation has been around for 75 years. Actually, we're celebrating our 76th year this year. And we're an agency that throughout the history of our time has really served to advance the frontiers of science and technology, all areas of science, engineering, technology, mathematics across the waterfront. And our investments over that time have given rise to search engines on the web, to a lot of the components of the smartphones, smart devices that we walk around with today, as well as access to organ transplant networks and optimization of those networks as well. Having said that, about 5-6 years ago, Congress, recognizing a few characteristics of our research enterprise in the country at the time, the acceleration of technology to the forefront in terms of the competitiveness that we see, the fierce competitiveness that we see in terms of key technology areas like AI and quantum and biotechnology and so forth, coupled with the fact that when you look at where our talent base is, yes, in institutions of higher education, but also in private industry, at nonprofits and philanthropies as well. So given the fact that we have a express need to ensure U.S. competitiveness for the long term in these key technology areas that are accelerating rapidly, and given the fact that our talent base is distributed across a variety of different sectors of our economy as well, the U.S. Congress set out to establish a new unit within NSF, Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, with the express purpose of trying to do two things. Number one, accelerate technology to the marketplace. And number two, find ways to be able to support a competition-ready workforce for the country in all areas of science and tech, stretching from those with PhDs and advanced degrees conducting research, to those who might be in the workforce today looking to reskill or upskill into new areas, new and emerging areas, new and emerging types of jobs. I think a key factor here in the establishment of TIP, and a key factor in this mission space of accelerating tech to the market and really thinking about the workforce, is also a desire to be experimental in nature in terms of our approach. That is to say that we want to not only innovate in terms of the science and tech that we're pursuing, but we also want to innovate in terms of how we are pursuing that science and technology, because it's clear that our approach, our robust innovation ecosystem, pulling together government, industry, and academia over the course of the last 8 decades or so, is one that others around the world know and understand. And so to remain at the vanguard of competitiveness, we want to be sure that we're tackling the right topical areas, science and tech areas, but also that we're innovating in terms of the mechanisms and the approaches that we have to bring people together and to be able to advance the frontiers of these various fields. And so that is, in some sense, the contextual framing that has led us to the concept of the X Labs initiative, something that is, in some sense, modeled off of new approaches in recent years by other sectors, notions of focused research organizations, for example, and the like, where we have an opportunity, we believe, to be able to pull together large multidisciplinary teams, where we're taking bets on teams and not just on the projects themselves. And we have an opportunity to be able to fund full-time dedicated teams with the autonomy to be able to pursue ambitious goals over a period of 3 to 5 to 7 years, and not having to be constrained by the typical timelines of NSF research grants, the typical constraints of having to constantly be submitting grant proposals, and in some cases, spending more time on the grant proposals than necessarily on the research as well. So we really see this initiative as an opportunity to be able to, in some sense, contemplate a new and different tool, if you will, in our toolbox. Not that it's the only tool we're going to have going forward. In fact, I think the robust innovation enterprise that we've supported for the better part of the last 8 decades, we want to continue to support. But here's an opportunity to add to our arsenal one more tool, one more capability in terms of how we support innovation in science and technology, how we support disruptive strides in these fields, and how we bring teams together to be able to do so. And so again, the framing for X Labs, as you'll hear the team talk about, is about betting on teams and not just projects, really thinking about what might be new platform capabilities, novel platform technologies that can serve as the foundation for future innovation and economic growth across multiple sectors of science and engineering, but also multiple sectors of the economy as well. And really, additionally, thinking about outcomes that go beyond traditional heuristics, traditional measures of success in science and tech, really thinking about outcomes beyond papers and publications and conference proceedings, to other forms of transformative outcomes that could be demonstrated by virtue of the adoption of platforms or technologies by a variety of organizations, or evidence of progression along the technology advancements spectrum, if you will, the technology readiness levels, moving up the technology readiness levels as we progress in this work. So we really think of the X Labs as an approach to be able to try to accelerate research, ultimately for practical use. It may feed back into the scientific enterprise, as those of you who joined our first webinar on the scientific instrumentation topic would have heard. But it may also be practical use and translation into market spaces and having cross-sector impact across those market spaces as well. Ultimately, we're really interested in trying to be able to provide the necessary resources to de-risk capabilities, to be able to mature capabilities that are not yet ready for private sector investment, but have the potential to be able to unlock new sectors and solve long-standing challenges that we face in certain areas of science and engineering that are emergent as we progress forward. So I hope this provides you with a sense of how we think of X Labs and how we frame X Labs within that historic mission space of NSF, advancing the frontiers of science and tech. In the last few years with TIP, really emphasizing how we can draw upon that foundational discovery to be able to accelerate innovation into the marketplace and accelerate talent growth as well along those dimensions. And then thinking about being an experimentalist organization in nature, that we want to consider new mechanisms and potentially non-traditional organizations with new types of team structures compared to some of our traditional awardees to be able to try to accelerate progress in specific areas of science, engineering, and the market space as we go forward. I want to stress on this point about non-traditional organizations. We're getting a lot of questions on team structure into the X Labs inbox. We saw a lot of that on the previous webinar as well. We want to frame this as experimental in nature, the initiative as a whole, and that includes how we think about the teams that could potentially apply as well. So we're looking for you all to be creative in your approach. We're not just looking for a small business or a lab group to slot into the program, but we're really looking for teams that can find ways to become independent organizations, independent X Labs in their own right, and thinking about you to be creative in how you structure that. If you're, for example, a university or you're an industrial research organization or what have you. And that is why you will see that the eligibility criteria are not based on organization type, but they're really based on sort of a functional characteristic, a functional form factor that we're hoping for you to be able to address in your response to this funding opportunity. The last thing that I want to say is, not every problem is X Labs shaped. And as I said earlier, this is, in our view, a new tool in the toolbox. And so NSF continues to fund science and engineering through lots of different mechanisms. And we simply consider this as another of those mechanisms that we can leverage when appropriate for the right type of problem space. And hopefully you see a couple of examples with the initial 2 topic areas that we've announced with X Labs. We expect maybe a couple more in the not too distant future, to be able to really illustrate that it's these types of problems for which we see X Labs as appropriately shaped and appropriately pursuing these challenges. Finally, if you are part of another federal agency tuning in because you're interested in this concept, if you're a philanthropic organization looking to this concept to see if it makes sense to potentially co-fund, or if you're some other capital partner as well who wants to partner with us, please email us at xlabs@nsf.gov. We really want to see how this approach can also, as we've done through other programs at NSF, unlock public-private partnerships to be able to support the best-in-class science and technology to yield those sector-defining platform technologies at the end of the day. So with that, you see on this slide, I think for a good chunk of the time that I've been talking, you see the NSF team that has come together to be able to develop the X Labs initiative. Becca was very kind in her introduction of me, but the reality is it's the folks whose names you see on this slide, and many of them will be appearing on this webinar at various points. Not all, but many of them will. It's these folks who have made this initiative into what it is and made this initiative possible. So my sincere thanks to them for all of their efforts in shaping the initiative, in shaping the quantum topic space, as well as our colleagues who've helped with the scientific instrumentation topic that we covered in the previous webinar. So with that, I will thank you all again for taking the time to join us today. I hope this webinar is helpful as we go through the details of X Labs and also go through the details of the quantum topic space. Rebecca, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Erwin. Okay, before we proceed, I really want to highlight the documents that are available on sam.gov for your reference. We will be reviewing information from both of these documents throughout the webinar. The first document is the Other Transaction Agreement Solutions Offering, or OTASO, which essentially serves as the overall master solicitation for X Labs. The second is the topic announcement for quantum systems, interconnects, and integrated photonics. So the OTASO contains details about the overall NSF X Labs opportunity, and then the topic announcement provides information about the timeline and specific scope of the quantum systems topic. Both of these documents are going to be hosted on sam.gov, where NSF posts specifically contract solicitations. And they are not going to be available on research.gov, where the NSF posts standard financial award instruments or other things like that. So we are going to discuss the differences between contracts and other financial awards later in this webinar. Next, I'd like to provide a brief overall summary of the X Labs initiative and set the stage. Our objective is to offer the structure, resources, and flexibility needed to develop truly innovative platform technologies that accelerate breakthroughs and unlock new economic sectors. The X Labs initiative features several key elements, namely independent research and development teams with the ability to adapt quickly to evolving technologies. Each team should have the operational autonomy including flexible use of subawards and independent hiring and use of funds. Teams will be awarded other transaction contracts with NSF with milestone-based funding, and teams are expected to enable cross-sector collaboration for high impact. The programmatic structure of X Labs includes a phase 0 planning phase lasting 9 months, followed by a 2 or 3 year phase 1, and then a 2 to 3 year phase 2. We anticipate that teams will receive between $500,000 and $1.5 million for phase 0. And then for phase 1 and 2, we expect teams to be awarded between 10 to 50 million per team per year to support their R&D efforts. Next, we're going to go over the high-level strategic objectives that NSF hopes to accomplish with the X Labs initiative. To present this section, we'll turn to Bridget Taraga, our strategic advisor for partnerships and TIP.
Thanks so much, Becca. As Erwin mentioned earlier in the conversation in his contextual framing about X Labs, times have changed. Global competition is fierce, research challenges have evolved, they've scaled, and they require interdisciplinary teams to solve the really fierce ones. To make breakthroughs, to sustain US leadership in critical science and technology fields, we will need new tools to complement the standard research grant. We need creative and flexible funding mechanisms. And to drive this change and to drive it quickly, NSF's Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate is rigorously testing new ways to accelerate discovery and create opportunities for US talent to launch breakthrough platforms that can shape the next generation of science and technology. We had a request for information out in the wintertime and got great community input to help us shape this program. And I'll move on to the next slide to define the sector building platforms, which is one of our strategic objectives for the X Labs program. X Labs, it's not about siloed science or niche products, but about novel platform technologies. These are technologies that can serve as a foundation for future innovation that could unlock entirely new sectors, including new fields of scientific inquiry. You can think of platform technologies as the building blocks or the base upon which scientists and engineers across the country could develop applications, processes, and additional technology. As a biologist, I think of CRISPR and green fluorescent protein, GFP, as well as polymerase chain reaction, PCR, as some platform technologies. You'll know PCR as biology's photocopier. It's the molecular biology technique that enabled us to come up with things like the COVID tests or do forensic science quickly. It's applicable for ag technology as well as personalized medicine. I don't know if there yet is a quantum platform technology, and that's in part why we're launching an X Lab in this topic. In fields like computer science, you might be familiar with the internet as the quintessential platform technology, which is an underlying infrastructure that supports countless platforms for e-commerce applications, services. So much of what we do every day depends on the internet today. There are also technologies like very large-scale integration, VLSI, that enabled the transformation from room-sized mainframe computers to personal computers, again, which has been an essential platform for so much of what we do. Let's move on to slide 9. Another strategic objective of the X Labs program is to develop new organizational research structures. And this is in part that experiment that Erwin mentioned. We're looking to foster independent research and development organizations, ones that have the structure, the resources, the flexibility to tackle large-scale scientific advancements. This is based on our hypothesis that the US ecosystem has the ambitious experts. It has people already with bold visions of the future. They're ready for sustained resources and the flexibility necessary to cultivate early stage platform technologies, but they're held back by the current infrastructure that we have. The academic and the industry settings may fail to incentivize R&D for emerging high-risk technologies that could represent a paradigm shift. And so here we're bringing forward X Labs as an opportunity for you to create research structures that complement traditional academic and industry labs, where the bulk of research and development will still likely remain, and to have X Labs specifically for these large-scale scientific breakthroughs and platform technologies. So if you're thinking about applying for X Labs, but you realize that you would have to significantly contort your existing structure to fit the X Labs initiative, I would ask yourself why. If you want to apply, consider embracing the novelty of this opportunity and create a fit-for-purpose X Labs with a full-time interdisciplinary team, because we're looking for these independent teams of full-time researchers operating with the flexibility and autonomy that they need, and we're hoping that they'll cultivate breakthrough technologies faster.
Thanks,
Over to
Bridget.
Becca.
Okay, next we're going to go over the programmatic structure of the NSF X Labs and their different topics. So first, we're going to define what a topic is and what a mission is in the X Labs program. Topics refer to the specific subject areas that are announced by NSF. They're chosen because they've been identified to be areas where breakthroughs have the potential to create or reshape entire scientific fields and technology sectors, particularly in areas critical to US competitiveness. For this initiative, NSF has announced the topics of quantum systems, interconnects, and integrated photonics, as well as the scientific instrumentation for sensing and imaging. Missions, on the other hand, are proposed by the teams themselves. Each mission should address key challenges, gaps, or bottlenecks within a given topic and propose a specific platform technology to be developed. Missions should focus on areas where the proposing team is uniquely qualified to advance the state of the art and address opportunities that are currently unmet by existing funding. The desired outcomes for NSF X Labs teams are really centered on achieving significant research and development breakthroughs. We do expect teams to develop technologies that address specific technology challenges and that ultimately result in innovations that create or transform what we consider possible in science and technology. We're also looking for early stage prototypes of these platform technologies, prototypes that typically would not be incentivized by private funding or by traditional academic funding mechanisms. So we've provided a few examples of outcomes that fall outside the scope of X Labs. These include the advancement of multiple arms of a technology without a clear mission. This is typically seen in like a research center. We also out of scope are incremental improvements to the current state of the art, development of technologies that already have a substantial private investment, particularly from the tech industry, and creation of test beds, data center infrastructure, or a data hub where storing or managing data is the primary focus of the proposal. And also missions where the challenges to be addressed are solely non-technical, such as commercialization of other business-related issues. Those are better suited for other funding mechanisms throughout NSF. And then I want to go over the programmatic structure once again, specifically regarding funding for teams. Teams would be selected for phase 0 after the initial review process and then enter a 9-month planning phase. During the proposal stage, teams should request the amount of funding needed for phase 0, which will be up to a maximum of $1.5 million. However, it's pretty important to note that not all the teams are really expected to require the full 1.5 million for phase 0. So do propose the amount your team reasonably needs to support the 9-month period. So complementary support from industry or philanthropic partners or other forms of cost sharing is encouraged, but it's not required, especially during phase 0 when you're building your team up in the first place. So next we're going to go over the funding mechanism, which is going to be an OT contract with milestone-based funding. To present this section, we're going to turn to Patrick Breen, the Senior Procurement Officer and Deputy Office Head of NSF's Office of the Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. So the next few slides do have a lot of text on them, and I'm not going to read through them for you. You all can do that when you get the slide deck. I do want to highlight a couple of things as we go through, just so that you can get a better understanding of what we think OTs are here and how we plan on using them. So first off, Other Transactions Authority is the newest obligation authority that NSF has. We did receive this authority in 2022 through the CHIPS and Science Act. OTs are often best defined as what they are not. They are not grants, cooperative agreements, or FAR-based contracts. They're not subject to those policy documents or regulations governing those agreements, and they're not subject to all of the same statutory requirements those agreements would be subject to. There are some statutes that will apply. You will see those in the other transactions solicitation. You'll also see those in any final contract documents, but it is a far lower burden than we see in some of our other instrument types. Additionally, an other transaction is really a flexible funding mechanism that allows NSF as the funding agency and an awardee to tailor terms, conditions, payment schedules. And in this case, we have decided we are going to use a milestone-based contract. We feel that that's going to be the best for us to be able to work closely with potential awardees and also relieve and reduce administrative burden on both the NSF and any potential awardee. The approach we're using is known as relational contracting. And what this really does is allow NSF and an awardee to work together to solve complex problems and provide a flexible framework so that we can work through any issues or anything else that may come up during performance of the award. It really allows us to work together to have a win-win solution. If we could move to the next slide. I do want to just talk through briefly what the different instrument types are we use here at NSF and how OTs are a little bit different. So if we look at this chart, again, lots of words here. The grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts, how we use those are governed by the Federal Grants and Cooperative Agreements Act of 1977. That act sets forward some very specific conditions on how we use those instrument types. So grants and cooperative agreements as financial assistance can be used to issue an award between a federal agency, in this case NSF, and a non-federal entity to carry out a public purpose. In these cases, NSF does not benefit from that particular award. We are funding specifically something for the good of the public, and they will use that funding with, in terms of grants, minimal oversight from NSF, in terms of cooperative agreements with some substantial involvement, and that definition varies depending on how substantial it needs to be for a particular award. Contracts are a bit more flexible. We typically use contracts to acquire property or services for our direct use and benefit. Those are things like computers, laptops, services that directly support our staff here at the foundation. We also use them for research and development. You may have seen a number of broad agency announcements come out of the foundation over the last several years. We also use them to support some of our research facilities that we don't operate through financial assistance. Other transactions, however, are very different. Here at NSF, other transactions can only be used in support of the TIP Directorate and its mission as established under the CHIPS and Science Act. It can be used for scientific and engineering related activities. And really, we do have it structured so that it does allow for a win-win partnership for both NSF and any potential awardees. If we go to the next slide, please. Looking through the flowchart we have here, this process is very different from what we see in other instrument types. And I want to highlight just a couple of things here. Right now, we're at this sort of routine blocks 1 and 2, where we've published the OTASA, we've published a topic announcement, we're waiting for proposals to come in. We have a very different evaluation process for these than you may be used to. We will have an initial proposal come in, the evaluators will look through that, and then we will invite a subset of teams back for oral proposals. At that point, we'll give some very specific instructions. Those teams will come back in and make their presentations. And then based on that, our evaluation team will conduct some discussions with to develop the documentation and selection recommendations, and then we'll start the negotiation of final terms and conditions. That's a shift from what you might be experiencing in other award types here at NSF, where we provide all that information on terms and conditions up front, and that's just what it is. Here we have a little bit of flexibility again after we've decided that there's a group of folks we'd like to make to awards to. Once we complete negotiations, we'll then sign the contract, and then there'll be some of that continuing engagement with NSF over the duration of the award. So Becca, back to you.
Thank you, Patrick. So next we're going to review XLab's team structures. This is a topic we've received many questions about. So I want to spend some time clarifying what an XLab team is and how much flexibility exists in designing one. There's no one single XLab team structure, but there are some traditional structures that will not be supported by this initiative. With XLabs, NSF aims to support non-traditional independent teams, specifically full-time teams operating outside the structure of traditional academic labs and industry R&D labs. The term team here, I want to clarify, refers specifically to a group of personnel working together towards one research goal and not a team of partnered entities or organizations. These teams are expected to function autonomously as independent entities by the beginning of phase 1. Teams must demonstrate a clear mission, strong leadership, and an innovative approach to the technologies and breakthroughs they plan to pursue. Every XLab team will have a lead organization. For some teams, especially small self-supporting teams, the lead organization may be the XLab itself, or the lead organization could be a host or temporary host of the XLab team. There will be one lead organization per XLab team, which will sign the OT contract with NSF. The lead organization may choose to subcontract with other partnering organizations. For example, an XLab might subcontract during phase 0 to fund their personnel who are currently staffed at a different organization, or a subcontract with new organizations during phase 1 to support their research mission. It's really important here to note that the XLab initiative does not intend to fund consortia. We're not looking for teams composed of primarily many different subcontractors under a single lead organization. We're also not looking for teams of existing collaborative lab groups. Our focus is really on that tight, dedicated, independent team that is organized in order to conduct innovative R&D research with urgency and purpose as one entity, but with the flexibility to make subcontracts as needed to support their mission. This is something that we've noticed is a point of confusion for different teams. So in phase 1, we expect that the core team will be composed mostly of full-time staff within one dedicated and independent team, and not a loose team of collaborators. There's no requirement to apply with a complete team or a finalized organizational structure before phase 0. Phase 0 is designed to help build the team and establish a workable governance structure if one does not already exist. So due to the short timelines of this topic, we do expect that a lot of the team building is going to occur after proposal submission. So don't be afraid to submit the written proposal if you don't have all of the senior key personnel or all of the partnerships that you plan to have later. The eligible XLab teams have to meet the requirements of an autonomy factor test to ensure that they are sufficiently independent, especially from a host lead organization. The teams have to demonstrate that their leadership structure enables decisions to be made quickly, efficiently, and independently from any other organization. So again, this is particularly from the host organization. Teams have to also have internal control over funding allocation, research directions, partnership agreements, intellectual property produced by the XLab, including, for example, licensing agreements, control over hiring, salary negotiations, and contracting. And the XLab team and its leadership structure are expected to be appropriately independent from any host or lead organization. NSF's goal here is really to establish these independent research teams as impactful and nimble within both the research ecosystem. We're broadly looking for teams to meet the spirit of the factor test and to develop types of independent structures of research groups. So there's nothing here that reflects NSF explicitly dictating exactly how a team should look or what entity type it should be. We're looking for teams to meet the spirit of the factor test and to be appropriately autonomous. Senior key personnel are going to be individuals who contribute in a substantive, meaningful way to the development and execution of the XLab. All senior key personnel whose qualifications will be the ones that are used as part of the selection criteria for teams. They must be full-time by phase 1. Teams may still hire part-time employees, vendors, advisors, subcontractors, research labs, etc., but those individuals would not be the senior key personnel. During phase 0, there's some flexibility to support teams via subcontract while they are still forming. So we don't expect senior key personnel to leave an employer or take a leave of absence from a faculty position until they know if their team was selected for a phase 1. The senior key personnel can only be listed on one proposal per topic announcement, and they can't be citizens of certain countries or appear on lists of foreign entities of concern. So you can read more about the research security requirements in the OTASO language. So here we've provided several example XLab structures in the table, and I really encourage you to review these examples in detail at your convenience. I would like to highlight a few distinct structures that we anticipate could be possible. In one scenario, the first one, the lead organization is the XLab team itself, and these teams do not have a host institution or a larger entity. They're already fully independent. In another case, the lead organization would host the XLab team throughout all of the phases. So there's also an option where the third option there, where the lead organization temporarily hosts the XLab team during phase 0, and then the team spins out of the host organization and becomes an independent entity by the end of phase 0. Just note that this list is not going to be comprehensive. We really strongly encourage teams to think creatively and outside the box when considering how to structure their XLab. So do consider new innovative approaches to team organization and to governance to develop workable, effective research structures, especially ones that don't yet exist. So to clarify, teams are not required to submit their proposal through a host organization. They can apply directly as an independent team. Before signing an OT contract, the team has to establish a legal entity, such as an LLC. These independent teams should be 100% dedicated to the specific R&D mission they are proposing, and they might choose to reorient or pivot their entire operational model to become an NSF XLab. This would be best accomplished by a newly formed team of independent researchers, that are specifically forming due to the XLab's announcement. Or it could be, a team that is still trying to establish themselves as a startup or a nonprofit that chooses to pivot to an XLab structure, or by, for example, an existing focused research organization that isn't already contracted within what would be a host nonprofit. It would be pretty difficult, I think, to qualify as an independent XLab team as a small business or even an existing VC-funded startup. A small business can't really continue its usual operations and simultaneously act as an independent XLab team. Any business would need to host an XLab team that operates with significant autonomy from the parent organization. So XLab teams must be distinctly separated from existing governance and fiduciary structures. For example, a company or a small business or a university. So by the way, it's not barred for an XLab team that is independent, that doesn't have a host organization to be a business. It simply is difficult for a business to operate its normal business every day and also be an independent XLab team. NSF is not interested in proposals that follow traditional models of lab groups or traditional small businesses, or other groups that aren't interested in forming an autonomous driven team. We would really encourage those traditional teams to be supported through SBIR or other NSF programs, and proposals that don't describe a team that would meet the autonomy requirements by phase 1 will be pretty quickly rejected at the written proposal stage or later if they don't meet the requirements. So next, we're going to go over the milestones and milestone payments that teams will develop and propose for each phase of the initiative. The milestones are going to be the distinct predefined performance checkpoints within an OT contract that teams must meet before payments are released. Teams are required to document their progress to NSF through deliverables and payments. The payments are only going to be made after progress is demonstrated. This approach differs from financial assistance awards and grants at NSF, where payment is issued before progress is shown. By using milestone-based payments, we do ensure that each XLab is outcomes-driven, not just activity-driven. And we want the teams to demonstrate both technical and programmatic progress towards their mission. Each of the milestones should have measurable exit criteria so that it's clear to all when the milestone is achieved. Milestones are going to be developed collaboratively with NSF, particularly during the proposal and negotiation stage before each phase. And milestones can be renegotiated to support rapid state-of-the-art innovation at the frontier. We do strongly encourage XLab teams to propose ambitious milestones, and significant transformative progress is going to be rewarded during the go, no-go selection phases, even if all of the proposed milestones are not achieved. So the milestone structure also allows teams that show substantial progress, for example, pretty early in phase 1, to unlock their additional funding and enable significant scaling throughout the phase as they progress. Teams are going to propose milestone plans for each phase, specifying their milestone tasks, deliverables, and payment amounts. And then the milestone plans and payment schedules will be negotiated with NSF before the OT contract is signed for phase 0, and then again before the OT contract is amended for phases 1 and 2. Milestone plans will be developed prior to the start of each phase. And essentially the milestones for phase 0 are going to be proposed and negotiated during the proposal phase. The milestones for phase 1 will be proposed and negotiated during the end of phase 0. And the milestones for phase 2 will be proposed and negotiated toward the end of phase 1. So the phase 0 milestones will be proposed by teams that are invited to submit an oral proposal package. So you do not need to propose milestones or a milestone plan during the written proposal stage. We do recommend proposers wait to be invited to submit an oral proposal package before you spend time preparing your milestone plan. During phase 0, teams will produce the planning documents required for phase 1 proposals. And then the table on the right illustrates the general format of the milestone and deliverables table, including some specific milestones that will require for phase 0. The teams will have the opportunity to specify their due dates and their payment amounts for their milestones. You can see there, they're in blue as they're editable. And then teams will receive additional guidance during phase 0 to help develop appropriate milestones for phase 1. So next I'm going to talk about the phase 0 review and selection process pretty briefly. XLabs will use a two-step evaluation process that is designed to reduce the burden of completing a full proposal on the proposers and the burden of reviewing full proposals on NSF reviewers. So first, teams are going to be asked to submit a concise written proposal. It'll be limited to 8 pages, and it will describe their mission, technology landscape, desired outcomes, qualifications, and overall team capabilities. The purpose of the written proposal is to clearly convey the team's key idea, demonstrate its significance and ambition, and highlight its importance for scientific innovation in the United States. NSF will then invite a select number of teams to provide an oral proposal and submit an oral proposal package, which is essentially a full proposal. At this stage, the teams will provide their budget, their milestone plan, any senior key personnel disclosures, and other required documents. And then invited teams will present virtually to NSF and will receive further guidance on the required materials for the oral proposal and the oral proposal package. We have gotten a few questions about how many teams will be invited to submit an oral proposal, and it's unsatisfying, I know, but NSF is going to leave this pretty open to ensure that all of the promising ideas that we see have the opportunity to be considered. So there's going to be no predetermined limit on the number of teams invited. All right, we're going to move on from the general overview of XLabs, and we'll now be discussing the specific topic of quantum systems, interconnects, and integrated photonics. So to present this section, we're going to turn to Peter Atherton, an NSF program director for our SBIR STTR program, and he has a deep technical background in the physical sciences, and quantum optics.
Great, thank you, Becca. Appreciate that. Okay, so I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes and provide some brief background on the choice of this XLabs topic. So, as I think we're all aware, quantum information science is a very broad field with many subdisciplines, and it's apparent that some of these disciplines are at or are approaching a transformational inflection point. For example, it's widely expected that quantum computers will, in the not too distant future, accelerate scientific discovery and push beyond the capabilities of classical computing. Some people would argue we're almost there right now. But technical challenges, of course, remain, and researchers around the country are working to overcome them. Now, for this XLabs topic, we believe that two areas in particular, namely quantum interconnects and integrated quantum photonics, would benefit from focused R&D efforts that could ultimately, in the longer term, accelerate the entire quantum technology enterprise. So quantum interconnects are essential for transferring quantum information between distinct subsystems, thereby enabling scalable and heterogeneous modular system architectures, which is very important. While on the other hand, integrated quantum photonics offers the potential for dense on-chip integration of optical capabilities critical for the practical integration of second-generation quantum systems. So the objective of this XLabs topic is to advance use-inspired, application-oriented quantum systems by developing prototypes of scalable, integratable, and interoperable quantum modules. Of course, the ultimate objective in the longer term is to achieve practical, commercially viable breakthrough technologies that will enable the efficient transfer of quantum information. As Becca emphasized earlier, we're looking for platform technologies that can be widely deployed rather than bespoke niche solutions. Could we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so what technologies are in scope? In answering this question, I think you should consider the following 2 points. First of all, we are looking for next generation quantum interconnect and/or integrated quantum photonics modules and their supporting technologies. And in conjunction with that, we're looking for systems or subsystems that offer new and widely applicable capabilities that are not currently commercializable and that will require early stage R&D investment. So if you're considering submitting a proposal to this XLabs topic, I think there are two important questions to consider. The first, it relates to technical risk. And the question is, will your team's technology expand the frontier of quantum systems beyond an incremental improvement in the state of the art? And the second question relates to your ambitions. Will your team's proposed R&D offer the potential for new platform technologies that will accelerate commercialization in the quantum enterprise and thereby ultimately boost the US economy? So that's a very, very quick overview of the background to this topic. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Becca. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. This is a quick outline of the timeline and submission that we're looking at. On June 30th, we're going to be hosting another webinar for the topic focused on a Q&A panel specifically. So we'll not present these slides, but we will dedicate a lot of time to answering your specific questions. Written proposals will also be due on July 24th. Oral presentations will take place sometime the week of August 31st. And then we anticipate that teams will finish negotiations with NSF by November and begin their phase zeros by December. And then after the 9-month phase 0, the phase 1 would go and start around September 2027. And then I will flag the go-no-go selection process is slated to begin 2 months prior to the beginning of phase 1, when NSF will begin to evaluate the phase 0 progress and determine which of the teams will transition to a phase 1. All right, thank you very much. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the team that made this possible. We have program directors who are experts in quantum physics and quantum computing, both Peter and some in the background. We have contracting professionals leading the charge with these other transaction awards. And then we have a group of extremely talented program directors and strategic advisors and others within TIP that are pushing this initiative forward. these are just some of the people who are working behind the scenes to make it all happen. And with that, I would like to invite everyone to join our Q&A session. Please welcome back our moderator, Bridget Taraga, and Q&A panelists, Joda Tongnapnua, Peter Atherton, and Patrick Breen. They will help me answer your questions during the remaining time in this webinar. So to participate, just click the Q&A button to submit your questions. And if your questions are not addressed live today, please feel free to message us at the XLabs email address.
Well, thanks so much for the questions that have already been put in the chat. We are grouping them into sort of themes, and we'll be answering them in themes. So the first theme that we're going to talk about is eligibility and team setup. So I've got a few questions for the group here. For senior key personnel, is keeping an academic affiliation a no-go if that affiliation does not introduce any claims on IP, etc., by the academic institution?
So the main thing we're looking for senior key personnel is for those key personnel to be full-time. We really want people to be able to dedicate their full amount of time to the team and to the lab and to work with urgency and purpose. The other kind of requirements around senior key personnel, I mean, there's a few for research security, of course, but they're pretty broad. So we don't dictate exactly how a team is set up, and we certainly don't dictate what affiliations a specific member might have or how they would set up their agreements with another institution to allow them to be full-time at their team.
Great. I have a specific example that you're welcome to generalize in your answer here. We're a startup and are collaborating on a research paper with researchers from JPL, NIST, and a university research team. Can these collaborators be included as part of the project team in the proposal?
I think the answer that I gave previously would apply here. If these collaborators are interested in joining the team and being full-time during phase 1 and really dedicating their this portion of their career to advancing that team, then yes, of course, they would be senior key personnel. If they are instead collaborators who are affiliated with JPL and would like to continue to be full-time at JPL or another startup or whoever it is, and they would not be a full-time dedicated team member, then they wouldn't be a senior key personnel. They might be a subcontractor or a staff on a subcontractor's team, and they would still be working with the XLab team, but they would not be the senior key personnel.
Becca, you mentioned that citizens of the People's Republic of China, DPRK, Russia, and Iran are prohibited from participating. Can you give some specifics? Exactly who are they? How does that prohibition work? Who's prohibited from being from those countries?
The senior key personnel are the only ones that are prohibited from being from those countries. Citizens of those countries, including dual citizens, I will say, are also prohibited. Can participate in other ways, including being anyone on the team other than senior key personnel, advisors, and subcontractors. It is only the senior key personnel.
Thank you. I have a couple questions about autonomy. How does NSF distinguish between a parent institution exercising governance oversight versus a parent entity providing operational infrastructure and compliance?
Patrick, do you have any thoughts on this one?
So this is a more complicated one. Can you read that question again? Because I'm just thinking through the first part. I think I missed the second part.
Yes. How does NSF distinguish between a parent institution exercising governance oversight versus a parent entity providing operational infrastructure and compliance?
Right. And so what we need to look at there is then that level of law, right? Are we talking administrative back office sort of functions, or are we talking about primary the primary activities under the agreement itself? So to the extent that ideally The entity we signed the agreement with would have its own unique entity identifier and be responsible for the primary tasks under the award. That's ideal. Their parent organization, be it a university or a private company, could provide a number of things. We really need to look at the specific details on how that particular relationship is structured before we could, either give the thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not it met our definition of independent.
I'll also add the autonomy factor test. We purposely put it together to be flexible. We wanted to make sure that different types of structures and different types of organizations could try to figure out how to meet what we were looking for in independence and autonomy in different ways. And so if a team really meets the spirit of the autonomy and independence that we're looking for, and is being structured and governed in a way that they're clearly making a lot of their own leadership decisions, I think that goes a long way, as opposed to needing to require some amount of logistical support for staffing or for HR and policy.
Yeah, I also think, Becca, the way this has been designed and the way we've intended this to be designed is that it will, the award itself is flexible to adjust that level of support and participation over time as well, right? We don't want to have tons of modifications to an underlying agreement, but regardless of where someone starts in phase 0, as they progress, how they're structured, how that particular organization receives support is structured will, by default, changes as they move through award performance.
Yeah.
I just want to jump into and encourage folks as they're thinking about this, again, to spend the majority of their time thinking about the team and the mission. And then, obviously you've got to have the structure right, but try to apply the spirit of the autonomy factor test, and then, find a mechanism that works. These are fuzzy questions. We are not evaluating this as, with the sense that these are black and white questions. Like, we expect there are many solutions to these problems, and we want you all to apply a creative solution that works for your team and mission. And then, we'll see how that shakes out in the review process.
Another question that's related to autonomy that may be partially overlapping, but I'd like to ask all the questions. The solicitation says X Labs must not require approval from a parent institution to allocate or spend funds. Does a narrow, time-boxed compliance sign-off for internal controls fall afoul of that factor? Or is it consistent with the holistic intent, so long as decision authority and cadence remain with the X Labs?
I would say we have to look at that, the holistic authority of what's going on. If what we're not looking for is for that lead organization to use that checkbox of hiring authority, for example, if we want to hire someone, to say, no, you absolutely cannot hire this person, or something like that, or you have to hire this other person. That's the type of autonomy that's a type of example of something that wouldn't be appropriately autonomous. And so does there need to be some kind of approval because this person, might under this agreement be a staff member of that institution? Perhaps. I mean, that's getting pretty nitty gritty and pretty in the weeds. Holistically, is the X Lab in control of its staff and its hiring decisions, and is able to hire the people it needs, right? That's the goal of what we're trying to get, is that we want these teams to be really nimble and to hire the best staff that will allow it to meet its goals.
Patrick, I'd like to turn to you to ask a couple of OT contract sort of related questions. One is, how will team members pay the bills while waiting for payment for milestones?
Right. So there's a couple ways we can do that. We understand fully if folks can't float large sums of money, especially if they're new entities. That's a given. We would be working with individuals to ensure that the milestones are structured in such a way as that there is necessary cash flow to maintain operations. We can look at making we can look at having a payment structure that allows for some sort of regular monthly ability to draw down a limited amount of funding. We could also look at some mechanisms. Again, it depends on what you propose. It depends on how we negotiate that. But we could also look at providing some upfront funding to ensure that there are some startup costs, because we do understand that every institution or every entity that is considering proposing is in a slightly different state. So we have a number of tools in the toolbox. That's part of the process that we would negotiate with a potential awardee. Both to make sure that we're not treating this like a grant where we're releasing funds up front necessarily, but also to make sure that we have the proper oversight controls both on our side and on your side as we move federal funds, out of our control and into somebody else's. So that's not a very definitive answer, but the answer really is going to be dependent on how we negotiate that final agreement, what makes the most sense for an award to a particular entity.
And Patrick, does NSF's Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPG, apply to XLabs?
It's not. The PAPG applies only to federal financial assistance awards. Other transactions are not governed by 2 CFR 200, which is the regulation that the PAPG really implements. Arrangements here, other transaction arrangements, are governed by NSF's other arrangements and other transactions guide. You can find that on nsf.gov. We can make sure it's also linked. I believe it is linked in the slides on the doing business with NSF. That is the document that governs how we intend to use other transactions here at the foundation.
I'd like to switch and ask Peter a couple of technical questions. Peter, does this topic support quantum sensing applications as well?
I mean, if it's a purely a sensing application, probably wouldn't support that. But I can see that there could be applications of interconnects between, to connect sensors with quantum computational processes. So that's an indirect connection. But I think if it's purely a sensor play, it probably is not a fit with this call.
I'll add that we actively have another
Right.
NSF XLab topic, which
Exactly.
is sensing and imaging, scientific
Yeah.
instrumentation for sensing and imaging. And that one does explicitly call out quantum sensors.
Yeah, so they're covered there.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is who this question is for, but it says it's not clear on XLab's goal in science and technology. Can you give specific examples?
I can take a stab at that. So, I think you could imagine that XLabs is a mechanism designed to go into a toolbox to help us drive scientific and technology progress forward, recognizing that we have lots of other kinds of tools in the toolbox. But where we see a gap is that oftentimes high market risk and high technology risk concepts often don't fall into the venture capital and other private funding sources don't have the capacity to support that, or they don't. And often academia doesn't have the capacity at the maybe high CapEx requirements or the range of interdisciplinary staff necessary to work on these kinds of problems with sort of the dedicated focus to achieve the kinds of progress we'd like to see in these kinds of breakthroughs. Simultaneously, we've seen the rise of ARPA-like agencies, but then also independent research organizations and focused research organizations. And this really is an effort designed to fund something akin to that shape in order to tackle these really large platform technology ambitions that the United States needs to make progress on in order to stay competitive and to stay ahead. So that's really what the program is designed to fund things in that shape. And I think some of these topic areas that we've announced are examples of big challenges or bottlenecks that we see as being really important and could use a dedicated team. So I'll open it up for the team if they want to expand on anything I just said.
I can just add one, can I just add one quick comment? So, I mean, I agree 100% with what Joda said. The issue with VCs is they won't fund this very high risk technology at this early stage. And we're looking to fund things which are so ambitious and so potentially impactful that it's going to take a lot of money to get from here to the point where the private sector would be interested in funding by and large. And there's no readily available other funding for this type of activity to get these teams that far along. And I think that's why this opportunity is, I think, really exceptional. One of the reasons why this is really exceptional.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I'll just quickly add, we're not just looking for great platform technologies or great prototypes to come out of this. I think I'm looking for great teams, and I'm looking for, are you coming to this proposal stage saying, I have the great idea and I can't get funding anywhere? Or I can't believe we're not investing in this. And we need to be, as a country, investing in this technology way more than we are right now. Those are the type of people that we're looking to fund.
I'd like to turn to some questions about program structure, phases, and milestones. Here's a couple. Will the full team need to be hired by the beginning of phase 1, or will some hiring continue into phase 1? And also, can senior key personnel be subcontractors in phase 1?
In phase 1, no. The senior key personnel should be need to be fully dedicated to the team. So on the team 100%. If they are funded through a subcontract, through some kind of complicated situation, I mean, maybe we can figure that out. That could be some of the ways that we are looking to creatively structure XLabs, but they shouldn't be kind of just subcontractor staff. They need to be dedicated 100% to the team. And then sorry, I forgot the first part of the question.
The first part of the question, will the full team need to be hired by the beginning of phase 1, or will some hiring continue into phase 1?
No. I mean, we're looking for the teams to be quite flexible. We're looking for, we expect a lot of the team will be kind of developed and figured out during phase 0. But of course, we're looking for the team to continue to develop into phase 1 and into phase 2. I mean, teams will need a diverse amount of personnel and experience, and that experience is going to change as they develop. Think of how a startup is formed and hired. Your personnel in the beginning is not going to be the exact same as the personnel in the end. And we do expect the teams to grow, and for people to similar to a startup or other type of organization, for people to move on and off of it flexibly. That's part of the autonomy that we're looking for.
The next series of questions is on sustainability. What is the expectation or aspiration for the XLabs team after completion of phase 1 or phase 2? Would it continue as a research-oriented activity? Should it transition to commercializing the results of the research? Do you have anything else in mind? And a related question, how does NSF envision XLabs teams sustaining themselves after the NSF funding period ends?
There's a lot of different roads that we're envisioning for different XLabs. One of them could be that it becomes some kind of sustained entity, although I'm not entirely sure that is the major goal of XLabs, is to develop all of these different long sustaining research centers. We're instead looking for really high impact technologies that if you achieved them at the end, if you're ambitious enough and you achieved what you set out to achieve, your organization and your team is going to be completely different. The whole research landscape would have changed because of the innovations of your team. And so maybe you go out and form a startup for a lot of these platform technologies, there'll be more than one startup formed if it is really successful. And so maybe an entire ecosystem of startups is formed. For some of these teams, it might be appropriate to then transition into the tech accelerator program, which is somewhat of a sister program to X Labs in the TIP directorate that was announced last week. So I would really look into the tech accelerator program, and they're having a webinar tomorrow, I believe, to explain more about that. But the technology might be at the right stage to transition into tech accelerator. And then, to be honest, some of these teams might accomplish what they needed to accomplish, and it might no longer be appropriate for an XLab team to form around that technology because it's progressed past where an XLab team is reasonable. And so the key personnel may disband the team and go on to proliferate the technology throughout the tech sector.
Okay, we have just 5 minutes left, so I am going to ask only one question at a time, but I'll ask you to be a little bit briefer in your responses. What is the proposal submission timeline for the imaging and sensing topic? Is it the same as the quantum topic?
They are offset. One is about a week before. You'll be able to find the timeline in the topic announcement.
Where in the initial written application should the anticipated budget and team building plans be described?
The team building plan should be in the team capabilities section. You can briefly describe your team. The budget is not required for the written proposal. We expect when you propose that you understand that there will be up to $1.5 million per phase 0, and you'll propose your budget if you're invited to submit an oral presentation.
What does NSF want the proposal to focus on? And here's 5 options: expanding existing lab capabilities, new equipment or infrastructure, materials research, a new lab model or platform, or scaling or accelerating research.
Maybe none of those. We are looking for your key idea that is a novel platform technology and would change the way the sector of integrated quantum photonics or quantum interconnects actually works. And we're looking for you to propose your idea and your team and why it's needed.
Next, can we talk a little bit about the proposal review and evaluation process? Will there be an interim right, wrong direction feedback mechanism or checkpoint prior to submission of phase 0 proposals?
That is what the written proposal is. Teams will submit those 8-page written proposals that are quite short. They're submitting their big idea. We will then review internal to NSF. It'll be a team of experts across NSF, including many experts in quantum technology outside of TIP. And the teams will then hear back if they've been invited to submit an oral proposal and present an oral proposal package. They will then present an oral proposal to a team of reviewers that may include those outside of NSF as well.
And Becca, can you give any more specifics on who will review the oral proposal packages? Will it include business, VCs, academic peers?
Yeah, it will include those internal to NSF, those external, but also feds, and also some external evaluators that will sign NDAs. So they will not be they should not have institutional conflicts of interest, nor will they be able to share any information that they hear. We cannot disclose who will be the external evaluators.
Can an XLab have more than one project?
Potentially, it should be targeted. If they have more than one project, if they have 2 targets, for example, we're really looking for a team to drive towards a key new platform technology and solve that particular challenge to make a big impact. We're not looking for teams to generally accelerate a wide range of different sciences.
I have one more autonomy question. Does a review based on legal, tax-exempt, conflict of interest, fair market value, and mission alignment guardrails fall afoul of the autonomy factor?
Either Patrick, you take it, or maybe we can repeat that.
I'll repeat it slowly. This is a lot. Does a review based on legal, tax-exempt, conflict of interest, fair market value, and mission-aligned guardrails fall afoul of the autonomy factor?
I don't understand what a review means in this case.
Yeah. So if there is if I understand this the way I think it is, if we're talking about like a parent institution providing reviews, I think that's one thing. If it reserves veto rights, like they can direct the awardee to not do something, that would, I think, run afoul of the that would run afoul of that factor. But I really think it's a lot of stuff at once. We'd really need to see some. I mean, we'd really need to see more around what that really means in order to provide a very definitive answer. So it seems like a review would be fine, but a review with the ability to stop some things seems to be a bit too much.
I'll just add, I know that we're being a little bit vague in terms of what we're looking for the autonomy factor test, because we're really excited to see what you as potential proposers come up with this type of autonomy and this type of freedom to design the kind of research organization that would work for you. We will be helping organizations during phase 0 figure out how to best structure themselves to meet the phase 1 guidelines and the autonomy factor test. The autonomy factor test needs to be met by the end of phase 0.
And here's a question that I'll take. It's, are international partners allowed? So international collaborators are allowed. You're allowed to work with folks from some of our neighboring countries with like-minded values, but the NSF funding will only go to US entities that are US based.
As the primary, as the lead organization.
Oh, well, most or all of NSF funding will go to US entities that are US based, but you can have collaborators that are any place bringing their own funding.
Yes.
All right, are startups that raised VC funding specifically for developing quantum interconnects eligible for applying?
My guess is that if you've already received a significant amount of VC funding and your idea was already deemed like within sort of that commercially acceptable time frame, it's not a like black or white no-go, but I do think you're going to have serious concerns with whether or not this is appropriately XLab shaped and appropriately ambitious from the R&D perspective. However, that's not sort of like, you might have found a handful or a VC that was like really excited about a project that had a very long runway. So it's not, I don't think, dispositive. I think the question would be, can your team focus on this XLab shaped mission, and will it have the necessary governance and fiduciary structure to allow it to do that without sort of rushing towards the first commercialization opportunity?
I think what we get from this type of organization is not needing to do the typical like VC requirements and VC incentives of a minimum viable product. We can really swing for the fences and go for some really high risk, exciting, far out technology.
And I have my last question for Peter before we wrap up our webinar. Peter, do you have to address both quantum interconnects and integrated quantum photonics in your XLab?
In my view, no, you don't. You need to address one of them. If you can address both, that's fine, but it's not a requirement to address both. I can imagine interconnects not involving integrated quantum photonics, and of course, I can also imagine impactful integrated quantum photonics innovations not being deployed as interconnects. So I think if we require both, we're going to limit the intake of ideas.
We want the teams to be really focused on a specific idea. And so I think requiring both would kind of, it might not allow the degree of focus that we're really looking for.
So Becca, over to you to wrap us up.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you so much. We are, once again, we're going to have a follow-up webinar on June 30th to continue this Q&A. Also, I know that is in quite a while, and a lot of teams are trying to rush to figure out their proposal and to get it in on time. If you do have any questions in the meantime, please do ask them of our xlabs@nsf.gov email address, and we'll get back to you. Thank you.